9 warships sunk in a single day. 14 of the world's largest bunker-buster bombs dropped in one mission. Over 3,000 targets struck in the first 10 days alone. This isn't a skirmish. This isn't a limited strike. This is one of the largest air campaigns launched by the United States and Israel in modern history. And it happened not in 2003, not in 1991, but in the spring of 2026. This is the military story of the Iran war, the operations, the weapons, and the battles that most headlines never had time to explain. To understand how the United States ended up flying nearly 2,000 sorties in a single week, you have to rewind to a mission most people had already forgotten: Operation Midnight Hammer. Back in June 2025, during Israel's 12-day war against Iran, American B-2 stealth bombers dropped bunker-buster bombs on Iran's underground nuclear sites at Fordow and Natanz. It was supposed to be a one-off, a message. Iran's nuclear program was set back, but not destroyed. Tehran vowed to rebuild. For the rest of 2025, diplomats tried and failed to find a permanent deal. By January 2026, patience in Washington had run out. President Trump warned publicly that a massive armada was heading toward Iran and that any future strike would be far worse than Midnight Hammer. A second carrier strike group, the USS Gerald R. Ford, was ordered into the region alongside the fleet already there. Trump gave Iran roughly 10 days to reach a deal. On the night of February 27th, Oman's foreign minister, fresh from meeting the U.S. vice president, reported that Iran had agreed to zero uranium stockpiling and full inspections. It didn't matter. At 3:38 p.m. Eastern Time, Trump gave the order: no aborts. The largest coordinated American-Israeli military campaign in decades was about to begin. 7 a.m. Tehran time, February 28, 2026. The United States called it Operation Epic Fury. Israel called its half of the campaign Operation Roaring Lion. Together, in what the Pentagon described as a single synchronized wave, they launched what CENTCOM called a massive, overwhelming attack across all domains. The numbers from the first 12 hours alone are staggering: roughly 900 individual strikes. By the 24-hour mark, over 1,000 targets hit. By 48 hours, more than 1,250. The Israeli Air Force alone flew its largest single operation in its history, roughly 200 fighter jets, striking about 500 targets across western and central Iran, concentrated on ballistic missile infrastructure. The opening strike was aimed squarely at the top. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's compound in central Tehran was flattened. Senior commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps were killed alongside him. Within hours, his death was confirmed. On the ground, Iran's air defense network, Russian-supplied S-300 batteries, Iran's own Bavar 373 systems, began falling silent, one by one. By the time the opening phase wound down, roughly a third of Iran's entire pre-war air defense network had been destroyed or disabled. The Iranian Navy fared even worse. 9 warships were sunk on the very first day. President Trump released an 8-minute video that night, telling the Iranian people directly, "The hour of your freedom is at hand." Iran didn't wait long to answer. Within hours, ballistic missiles and drones were in the air, and this time, the target list wasn't just Israel. Iranian forces launched Operation True Promise 4. Inside Iran, some called it simply the Third Imposed War. In the opening 48 hours, strikes hit 7 countries at once: Israel, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. The Fifth Fleet's own headquarters in Bahrain took damage. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Al Dhafra in the UAE, Ain al-Assad in Iraq, all struck. At Ain al-Assad alone, at least 64 American service members suffered concussive injuries from the blasts. But the single most consequential hit of the entire opening exchange happened in Jordan. Iranian missiles destroyed an AN-TPY-2 THAAD radar system at Muwafaq Salti Air Base, one of only 9 such radars that exist anywhere in the U.S. military's global inventory, worth roughly $300 million. Analysts describe the loss bluntly. It blinded American early warning coverage across a huge stretch of the region, right when it was needed most.
Iran's missile arsenal going into the war was estimated at around 2,500 ballistic missiles. Its arsenal wasn't improvised, it was layered by design. Solid-fuel Sejal missiles and Shahab-3 derivatives like the Imad and Ghadar-110 were reserved for high-value hardened targets. The Hyber Shaken, with its maneuverable re-entry vehicle, was built specifically to dodge interceptors. And beneath all of it, a constant floor of Shahed-136 drones, cheap, slow, and relentless, designed to exhaust air defense systems through sheer volume. By early April, independent trackers had documented 95 separate Iranian strike waves in barely 5 weeks. War at this scale doesn't stay clean, and 2 incidents from the opening weeks show exactly how chaotic it became.
The first was friendly fire. A Kuwaiti Air Force FA-18 pilot, in the confusion of a saturation attack, shot down 3 American F-15E fighters. It's one of the costliest fratricide incidents in modern coalition warfare, a reminder that in an airspace this crowded, with drones, missiles, and jets from a dozen air forces all in the same few hundred miles of sky, mistakes are almost inevitable. The second incident sounds like it belongs in a different era of war entirely. During a concurrent saturation attack on Camp Bering in Kuwait, a single manned Northrop F-5 Tiger II, a fighter jet designed from the 1960s, slipped through American and coalition air defenses and dropped bombs on the base. Investigators later worked out how. While air defense systems were fully occupied tracking incoming drones and missiles, the aging jet flew in at extremely low altitude and exploited a detection-to-impact window of roughly 2 minutes. It was over before anyone could react.
2 very different stories. One about the danger of too many allies in the same sky. The other about how even the most advanced air defense network in the world can be beaten by patience, timing, and a 60-year-old airframe flying low enough to hide. By the time Epic Fury launched, Iran's 3 main enrichment sites, Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan, had already been hit once, back in 2025. This time, the campaign went further. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs described the fresh damage to all 3 sites as extremely severe. On March 21st, U.S. forces returned to Natanz specifically, hitting it again with bunker buster bombs. Russia condemned the strike as a violation of international law. Russia's Rosatom had staff working at Iran's Bushehr reactor and had already evacuated close to 100 personnel earlier in the war, worried about a strike gone wrong at a live nuclear reactor. The International Atomic Energy Agency pleaded publicly for restraint, warning of the risk of a genuine nuclear accident, not just a military one.
Iran answered by striking the southern Israeli town of Dimona, injuring at least 78 people. Iran said it had specifically targeted Israel's Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center, a direct nuclear-for-nuclear message. There was one more attempt that almost changed the shape of the entire war. According to CNN and the Wall Street Journal, citing U.S. officials, Iran tried to strike the joint U.S.-UK base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, one of the most strategically important and remote American installations on Earth. The attempt failed. One missile broke apart mid-flight, the other was shot down by a Navy SM-3 interceptor. Had it succeeded, few doubt the war would have escalated even further. By the war's later phase, independent assessments put Iran's nuclear setback at somewhere between 60 and 80% complete. Real damage, but not the kind of total elimination that ends a program for good, especially with elements dispersed and buried underground where inspectors can't verify anything directly. While fighter jets and missiles dominated the headlines, Iran was fighting a second war, an economic one, and its chosen weapon was geography. Roughly a fifth of the entire world's oil supply moves through the Strait of Hormuz.
Iran didn't need to win an air battle to hurt the United States and its allies. It just needed to make that strait too dangerous to use. It worked. Commercial traffic through Hormuz dropped by more than 90% almost immediately after the war began. At one point, roughly 150 freight ships and tankers sat stalled, waiting for a route that no longer felt safe. Iran then began selectively approving passage, letting through its own ships, ships from countries that struck side deals, and ships willing to pay Iran a toll to pass through waters it doesn't legally control.
The ripple effects reached countries that had nothing to do with the war. Fuel shortages and rationing hit parts of Asia that depend heavily on Hormuz oil. Fertilizer supply chains tightened. Airlines canceled entire route networks overnight. By June, the running cost estimate for the 2-month air campaign alone had reached roughly $25 billion. And that number didn't even touch the global economic damage of a shipping lane running at a fraction of capacity for months. It's easy to think of this war as fighter jets and missiles, but for ordinary people, from Tokyo to Rotterdam, the war showed up first as a number on a receipt at the gas pump. By May 5th, the most intense phase of Operation Epic Fury was declared over. But over turned out to be a loose word. A ceasefire in April collapsed within days. A summer memorandum signed with real ceremony, Trump at the Palace of Versailles, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian in Tehran, was supposed to close the book on the war and reopen Hormuz for good.
Instead, Iran kept testing the edges of the deal, warning ships to stick to Iran-approved routes, reportedly trying to charge tolls for safe passage, and on July 6th and 7th, firing directly on 3 commercial vessels in the strait. The United States answered immediately with fresh strikes, and by mid-July, the naval blockade that had been in place for months was fully back in force. American drone boats struck an Iranian vessel in the strait, the first attack of its kind in the entire war. Trump himself said on July 7th that he considered the truce over. Then, a day later, softened that, saying the exchange wouldn't necessarily mean a long-term return to full-scale war. It's the kind of contradiction that defines this conflict, a war that keeps almost ending and keeps almost restarting in the same week. So what did nearly 5 months of the most intense air campaign in a generation actually accomplish? Iran's conventional navy? Gone, by most assessments, somewhere between 85 and 95% destroyed. Its air defense network? Gutted, missing roughly a third of what it had before the war. Its nuclear program? Badly damaged, but according to independent analysts, not eliminated, with breakout capability still assessed as a real possibility rather than a closed chapter. And the human cost sits behind every one of those percentages. Thousands killed across Iran, Israel, Lebanon, and the Gulf states, and millions displaced by the fighting in Lebanon alone. Some outlets have already started calling this the Third Gulf War, a name that puts it in the same historical bracket as the 1991 Gulf War and the 2003 Iraq War. Others, noting that the first strikes landed during the holy month of Ramadan, have simply called it the Ramadan War. Whatever history ends up calling it, the tactical picture is clear. This was a war fought with 60-year-old jets flying under radar coverage, with bunker-buster bombs the size of small cars, and with a narrow strip of water that turned out to be more powerful than half the missiles fired at it. Wars are usually remembered by their outcome. This one, so far, doesn't have one. Just a series of ceasefires that don't quite hold, and a strait that keeps closing and reopening depending on the week.
What began as a single synchronized strike against one man's compound in Tehran became a 5-month campaign involving 9 countries, thousands of sorties, and one of the largest coordinated air operations since the Iraq War. It is, as of this recording, still not finished.